Yo, 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 what is going on, everybody? It's your boy, Gsluke, here with our DFS and betting live stream for this week's Wells Fargo Championship. We've got ourselves a signature field event. We've got all the studs playing, except for Scotty Scheffler. So, an open betting board, betting week, DFS week, with some decent contest over there for the GPP side. So, first off, welcome on in. We got Bleedo down there, Barry R, Jordan, 8-Game, Bart, Bruce, Kevin, Philly. I want to get to all you guys down there, but first off, welcome on into the live stream, and hopefully you're ready to get after it for this week's contest. So here in this live stream, you guys know the deal at this point. We do 4 of these a week. Got to go through everything you need to know for tomorrow. So tomorrow, the start of the main slate, going to go through all things weather, how that'll impact both DFS and the prop side. And then afterwards, going to give its full attention both to the fantasy and the prop side. So for DFS, going to go through some of the weather impact, right? Whether that's going to be something to keep an eye on. Also, some of the leverage ownership spots that you guys need to worry about. And then afterwards, we'll go through some underdog and prize pick stuff. So if you're watching this on replay, that is the schedule of events to come. But if you're down there in the live chat, ask any questions that you have along the way. So whether it's about a specific player you want my take on, go ahead and let me know that down in the chat. Also, any strategy stuff, right? Going out there, actually building lineups, all of that is on the table. So whatever it is, go ahead and fire down below, but let's go ahead and get this thing rocking. So the first thing I want to look at is the weather, and based on the way that they set up tee times, there's not going to be a massive edge. So I talked about, right, getting into that weather angle, but it's not going to be a massive advantage this week, right? Normally, especially for a full field event, right, we'll have guys going off in the AM, then like a 3-hour window where there's no tee times, and then all of those PM guys going off. Because there's only 69 players in the field, and because of some of the weather concerns, they're having them go off around 11 local time. So you can see in the morning, they're calling for some storms over here in this area, and they've already gotten about 0.6 inches of rain this afternoon. So it's going to be an extremely soggy golf course, likely going to be lift clean in place out there for the first round of action. And that might even bleed into Friday, right? If it gets that much rain precipitation over the next 12 hours or so. You can see on this HRRR forecast that they're calling for like over 2 inches of rain, right, to come down in the morning. If that happens, there's a chance that they have to delay play tomorrow. So on all their websites, if we bring up the Wells Fargo site, you can see that they're calling for an 11 a.m. start, but even they say as of right now. So they add that little caveat on the end because I think there's a good chance that we see a delay in play. On top of that, you have like 40-mile-an-hour wind gusts out there towards noon. So as that thunderstorm rolls through, so I would imagine that if this forecast holds, if we see this tomorrow morning, that there's probably going to be a start closer to like 2 or 3 p.m. So I think they'd be able to get most of play, if not all of the play in, right, if they have that kind of delay. But we'll have to see what the forecast looks like, right? Because if the rain isn't as heavy as what they're calling for, right, maybe it doesn't have to be a delay, right? They could probably play through that wind around noon, but we'll have to see how it all shakes out. So it's not going to be super actionable because the tee times are 3 sums off both tees, and because there's only about a 2.5 hour split between the first and the last tee time. So if there was going to be an edge, right, it would be a micro edge, if anything, right? Maybe 5-6 holes where the one side would get that advantage. And it's not going to be a full-fledged advantage like we have for most of these main slates. So just wanted to start there. Golf course in general, right, it's a difficult track. I guess a few things to note with all that rain is that's going to play even longer than usual. So it's already an extremely driver-heavy course. In fact, you can see they hit driver on 12 of 14 holes. But with the wet conditions, you can bet that that's going to be 14 of 14 where players are hitting driver. And I would say that this bomber opportunity where they're gaining about 1.7 strokes per round, some of your longer players might even be closer to 2.5 strokes per round. So I think there's going to be a huge emphasis on that power off the tee. This approach distribution will probably be skewed towards the long irons even more, right? Without all that rollout off the tee, right? This is a course with a lot of elevation changes. A lot of the downhill holes that play like 500 plus yards are reliant on getting an extra 20, 30 off the tee along the ground, right? You land it, you have that downhill lie, you get that extra yardage. You're not going to get that tomorrow, right? So a lot of these shots that are maybe from 160 to 175 that you have on those downhill par fives are probably going to be like 200-yard approach shots. So, to start the week, I was already looking at a lot of driver-heavy players. I was already looking at a lot of long iron players. So this doesn't really change the profile of what I'm looking at. But what it does do is put even more emphasis on this 2 skill sets. So I think if you're a shorter player, you absolutely have to be a really good long iron player or you stand no chance out here, right? This is not a putting contest. It's not a putting fest like you have at some of the easier golf courses. And if you're not going to be somebody that's gaining, right, that 2, maybe 2.5 strokes per round as a bomber out there, you better be one of the best players in the field from 175 to 225. So that's the main change that I would notice. That's the main thing I want to point out from the weather perspective is that this golf course is going to be even longer than what it has on the scorecard. And it's like a 7,500 yard par 71. So real difficult track. That is the main change that we have heading into lock. Let me go ahead, bring up my fantasy projections now, and we'll focus more on the fantasy golf side here. So what we're going to do for the fantasy golf section is kind of go tier by tier, and I'll give you some of my general thoughts. We'll talk about some of the chalk, some of the low round options that you could potentially pivot to, and just give you an idea of what the field is going to do and go with, right? Give you an idea of where the ownership is going to come in. So you can see I have a lot of stuff blacked out on there. Of course, guys, the uncensored version is going to be over there on my Patreon page, but I do have a few highlighted plays on here that I want to go through together just to kind of highlight a few things I noticed about the player pool, a few guys that I'm maybe getting to, and give you a few reasons for that. But for everything, right, that is blacked out, make sure to check out the version on the Patreon page. So there's a link down in the description of this live stream of the replay, if you guys are watching this after the fact, where you can get that access to these spreadsheets. And for access, an entire month of access out there for these spreadsheets, what I do for the main slate and for Showdown is only $15 a month. So you'd probably expect it to be like $50 to $100 like you have with a lot of other tout sites out there, but it's only $15 and you get this for not only the main slate, but also for the Showdown stuff. So check that out if you guys are looking for it. And in terms of what we're going to do here, let me first catch up on chat, and then we'll talk through some of these plays here. So what do I think about Benny Ann? I think he's an okay ball striker, but I think he's a little bit overpriced. So he's not my favorite play. You got Rory on birdie better matchup and Alex Noren 71 strokes. I like the Noren over. The birdie better matchups I usually stay away from. Who do we like for one and done? You're in the middle of the pack. Okay, so I would say you want to get different if you're in the middle of the pack. Lowest owned Cantlay or Burns, why not? Wyndham, or I guess you're saying Wyndham, right out there at the last guy there. Wyndham, a little bit chalky, so I might avoid him out there this kind of field, especially as a last year's champion, right? He'll get some exposure on that alone. I don't hate going to Sam Burns. We're going to talk about him a little bit later as a play I wanted to point out, but he had his kid 2 weeks ago, so that wasn't really public knowledge. I was trying to keep up with the social media, but wasn't posting about that right over there the last 2 weeks, but that's because he's been dealing with fatherhood, so he's obviously not going to withdraw now, right? We know that from Sam Burns now that he's actually had his child. And this golf course, my number one comp course this week, if you guys haven't already seen my breakdowns, it's the Valspar Championship, right? It's the Innisbrook Copperhead course. That's the number one track, number one golf tournament I'm using to compare to this week. And he won this back-to-back years. This year, finished top 10 at this event, right? He has like a floor of a top 10 at that golf tournament. So imagine how well he'd play here, right? So if you take a look at the course history, you'd expect him to be really good. Has not been as great, right? Missed the cut last year, right? Withdrew a long time ago, which we don't know the reasons for that. So probably don't weigh that one too much. But T55 the year before that, not what we're hoping for. But if you're looking at comp course history, just overall upside, right? With Sam Burns, you know it's there. So you're going to have a good iron week for him to pay off. But he's shown that ability before, right? And when he has those good iron weeks, a lot of times it translates to him getting into contention. Let's see, what else do we got going on? The one guy I'm playing in a single entry, probably have to go with Hovland. And there's a couple reasons for that, right? He's super low owned. If you're playing in a large single entry, a higher dollar single entry, that is, you're talking probably sub 10% ownership. So we'll talk more about Hovland later, but that's the answer. But I'll elaborate when we get to him. Eckroat, I think he's an okay play, not the best off the tee. What's going on, Bill? Hopefully you're having a great week. So we'll talk about some of the guys like Eckroat, Hovland, who I'm taking for the one guy I'm playing in single entry. We'll talk about them in a few minutes here. So I just want to take it tier by tier, right? Not get too far out of place when we're talking about players. So if you have players you want a little bit of elaboration on, right, we want me to do a deep dive on, wait till we get to that tier. So up top, right, we're going to talk through the studs first, 8-9K range, right, next. Then go into the 6s and 7s. So try and base your questions that way when it comes to that. So let's start up top with some of our studs. So up top, your highest owned player is Rory McIlroy. And part of that is the fact because he's won here before. He has really good course history, but it's not invincible course history, right? You take a look at last year where you finished in T47. He's had years, right? 2018, for example, where he went out there and finished T16. So he does have the win mixed in, right? A T8 finish. 2022, by the way, if you're looking at quote unquote course history, this is not at Quail Hollow. So the 2022 Wells Fargo was played at TPC Potomac. So just look at any other year to get that course history, and you'll see that it's solid, right? It's some of the best course history that we have up top, but it's far from being unbeatable. So I understand he's coming in off a win right over there at the team event, but how seriously do we take a team event in the grand scheme of things? And an $11,800 30% of Rory McIlroy is really hard to get to for myself. So, obviously, if you liked him on Monday, if he was one of your bets this week, right, you're probably playing Rory. I don't have any issue with that, as he is, maybe the best player in this field. I'd put my money on other people to be the best player in this field, frankly, especially in some of the major championships. I think there's guys that would take, maybe even 9-10 guys that take over Rory McIlroy at any of the four majors. But, I understand the play. I understand the love for Rory, right? He's one of my maybe top 20 favorite players on tour. Some of the shit that he said, of course, just PR stuff is why he's not higher on that list. But yeah, in terms of DFS exposure, nearly 30% of Rory McIlroy, like, no, thank you. Now, I think in some GBPs, he might be closer to 24, 25%. But I think in the big lotteries, right, in some of the more casual contests where you're going to see a lot of just your random, I like to call them toilet lineups, right? People that are just entering lineups where they're sitting on the toilet and whatnot are going to enter Rory McIlroy, right? Those sort of people that hardly even watch golf, or heck, they may not even watch the events right out there with their lineups are going to click on Rory because he's the guy that they know up top. So I think in the big lotteries, again, $5, $20 GBPs is where you're going to see that 30% ownership number. And that's where I play my exposure, right? I play a lot of the big lottery contests, and that makes them an easy fade for someone like myself. Now, I think in the higher dollar single entries, right, where you might see inflated ownership on a few other players, like Wyndham Clark, I think in high dollar single entries will be like 25, maybe even 30% owned. I think Rory is going to be lower owned in those sort of contests. So you've got to understand that these ownership numbers, right, are catered towards some of the large field GPPs, in that there's going to be some nuance when it comes to the contest that you're entering. Xander Schauffele getting some attention. I have Wyndham Clark at nearly 23, nearly 24% ownership out there at 10,500. So if you're taking any of these 10K options, you're paying with it with ownership, but it doesn't mean that you have to fade the ball. In fact, I'm playing Xander, right? I'm playing Wyndham, as you know, right, with that outright bet that I'm taking. But so I think you should fade probably one of the three. But even if you wanted to fade two or even all three of those top end players, I think everything is on the table here. And I know a few DFS players that I've talked to this week that are fading all three guys up top that are going down here and taking this 9K range. Now, I'm not as big on that, right? There are a few guys down here that I like Max Homa, right? Viktor Hovland, for example, that I promise we'll talk more about Hovland here in a second. But like Cantlay, I don't really love Tommy Fleetwood this week. Colin Morikawa, I surely don't love at this kind of golf tournament. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't get there, right? The guys that I'm expecting to have a real chance to win this week are some of these 10K players. And in fact, I considered playing Rory McIlroy too, but when I saw him there at 30% ownership, he made him a spot that I was going to fade. So I think up top, you pick your guys, right? I told you a few of the guys that I'm playing, right? You just go out there and take your players, right? If there are guys on Monday that you were backing for outrights, like I think those are pretty decent stands to go out there and take in DFS. Just make sure that you're, fading some players up top, right? Make sure that you're getting over the field on the players that you're taking. So you're not just paying the rake up top, right? I think the worst thing you could do would be to play everyone up here from, let's say, $8,800 plus. Even if you're 150 maxing, right? I'm 150 maxing this week and I can't fit in all those players, right? With only a 69 player field, you're gonna have to get leverage. Like you just can't punt the entire top end of the board, kind of like you could in a full field event, right? In a full field event, you're going to have players down low that are going to be super low owned, right? They're going to be like 1-2%, right down there in the 6-7K range. Whereas this slate, because there's only 69 players, even your like medium owned players down low are like 5-6%, right? You still have to take 15-20% to get over the field. So you don't have as much flexibility to punt up top, right? When you have all those leverage spots, all those guys you can get 20-30% over the field on, right? It's easy to go out there and get different, but it's not as easy this week with the average ownership being so high. So I think up top, you've got to pick your spots is essentially what I'm saying, right? You've got to get over the field. You've got to fade some guys up here. To give you an idea of a few fades I'm playing, right? First off, Rory, I'm not playing, right? He's a fade for me this week. Patrick Cantlay is a fade for me this week. Colin Morikawa is a fade for me this week. Sahith Theegala with his off the tee accuracy is a fade for me this week. I should say lack of off the tee accuracy with this to hit the gala. Siwoo Kim is a fade for me also, right? Not the longest player. So I kind of worry about that at a soft Quail Hollow. Alex Norn, a Benny Ann, right, are fades for me down here in the 8K range. So sure, I can tell you who I'm playing all we want, right? We can talk about pretty much anyone up there, $8,000 plus, right? And convince ourselves to play them this week. I think the more important part where you're really going to win or lose this week are picking the guys not to play, right? Trying to leave guys out of your player pool, because I think punting up top is probably not the best strategy. A player I want to point out is somebody that I'm getting to. Actually, we'll do that after I talk about the Homa Hovland. Homa, right, top 3 at the Masters, playing well, has won at this golf course. A little bit of a no-brainer play at $9,400. Is coming in with some ownership, though, so I've got him at 18.1%. Hovland, though, is the hit-or-miss play of the week, right? This is where I'm taking a shot. This is where I'm going a little bit outside the box with my exposure, right? Past champion, returning champion, Wyndham Clark, like no-brainer. Sure, that makes sense. Max Homa, we just talked about it, right? That's a no-brainer too. Hovland, way more out there, right? And he has some course history, so he has that going for him. I think the shots gained metrics, which I didn't even mention on my preview. I meant to go through these when we were going through it over there on Monday for that show. But Viktor Hovland has not even been playing that bad, right? He's gaining 0.7 strokes off the tee, 0.34 with the approach. Go to the last 12 rounds, he's still playing well. Look down here, he's gaining 0.45 off the tee, 0.34 with the approach again. I mean, these shots gained metrics aren't the kind of stuff we saw towards the end of last year, right? Where he was gaining over a stroke per round, both off the tee on approach. But let's not act like this guy is playing slapdick level golf. I mean, around the green, slapdick level, right? Losing like a stroke per round. Like, sure, that's not great. But at the same time, the categories that we really care about, and even over the last 24 round sample size, he's gaining a stroke to the field. He's still gaining a stroke to the field with the ball striking. And sure, the around the green is making up for all the gains with the flat stick. But once he figures that thing out, I mean, he did last year, right? He was gaining with the around the green play for a lot of 2023. This guy is going to ascend back to what we've seen him before. And a $9,200 disrespected, only 13% projected owned Viktor Hovland seems like the perfect spot to just completely disrupt this kind of GPP, right? I mean, if he goes off, he finishes top 5 this week, that breaks the slate, right? He's like 12, 13% owned. I think in some of the big dollar single entries, he'll be sub 10% owned out there if you really have to spend your money. And it's because people don't have the stones to play Viktor Hovland, right? To put their money behind a guy who has not really shown it of late. But I mean, if you're that short-sighted with golf betting, you're not ever going to win a GPP, right? Every single week you go out there, you have that guy who returns to his form and, you know, a lot of times doesn't have the best form coming in, but still finishes top 5, top 10. Sometimes that player even ends up winning the golf tournament. I mean, we've seen that a few times already to start here in 2024. So don't act like you'd be that surprised if Hovland ends up winning this golf tournament. So obviously I bet him outright this week. This number actually drifted to 30-1. So I got a square number, I guess, at 25. Homa went to 20, right? Clark went down to 15. JT went to 25. So most of them went in our favor. But yeah, Hovland is now available at 30-1. Like if you're going to take a shot on anybody as just like a pure pedigree play, right? Somebody that's just better than the number, Viktor Hovland is your guy. So I'll play him in GPPs. I feel better about that exposure than I do for the outright. I think him coming out and just winning, right, snapping out of it and winning is probably a little bit far-fetched, right? That's why he's 30-1, right, to win this signature event. But in GPPs, where a top 5, a top 10 might get there at $9,200, I definitely think he has that in him, right? I think he has a pretty damn good chance to go out there and do that. So he's I mentioned before I talk about him as maybe my favorite play, and he is, right? For large field GPPs, if you're looking to get leverage, he's the perfect type of player, right? And, you know, we talk about plays on these live streams, but it's more so, right, wanting to focus on the process here. The process in getting to a Viktor Hovland is taking a long-term, right, winning sort of player, right? High pedigree, I mean, world top 3 player, right? Viktor Hovland when he's playing his best golf, that is completely disrespected with the ownership and the price, right? He's 9,200, which is cheaper than where you normally see Viktor Hovland. He's 13% owned. And like I said, the shots gained metrics aren't even terrible, right? He has course history at this track. It's just that people are so short-sighted, right? They're so emotional when they're betting golf that they won't let somebody like him slide, right? You can see he hasn't even played that much, right? He has the miscut at the Masters, hasn't done all that much else. They point to him, you know, grinding on the range and look at it as a negative. I have to say, like, I mentioned this, I know on one piece of content this week. I know I mentioned it on a few other pieces of content that I was commenting on. He is the hardest working golfer on all the PGA Tour. hands down, from what I've seen at events, every single time I walk by the range and he's not like playing a practice round, he is grinding on the range. And I don't know how many balls he hits a day out there preparing for a tournament. I have to imagine it's at least 1,000 golf balls, right, over the few days prior. No one else is doing that sort of work. So sure, he's working on something. He's clearly not at the top of his powers, but when this guy gets back to it, it's going to be scary stuff. And the only other player I've seen do that, by the way, and the player that I'm going to mention here doesn't do this anymore. So there's it's a kind of sad reality. But Bryson DeChambeau, right? When Bryson went out there and won the U.S. Open, was at the peak of his powers, right? Remember at the U.S. Open, he was grinding like 4 hours after the round ended, right? Into the dark. They had to bring out the lights for Bryson, right? That kind of work ethic will take you places, right? It took Bryson to the top of golf. He's a live. He's no longer that player. He does not work that hard anymore. And it's a sad thing to see, right? As a former Bryson fan. But Viktor Hovland is the only player since then I've seen with that work ethic. And that took Bryson to the top of the game. I have to imagine, hopefully he's working on the right things, because if he's putting in that much work, I think a lot of really good things are to come for Viktor Hovland. So that's my take on it. I'm going to try and be early on the kid. And in general, I used to give him a lot of shit, especially for around the green play, choking, all those kind of things out there in the PGA Tour. He fixed the around the green. It's become an issue again. So I think he can fix that, right? He fixed it before, he can fix it again. And the choking thing has gone away, right? He's become a pretty clutch player over the last year or so. So I'll give him a little bit of slack. Let me catch up on chat, see what's going on, and we'll hop into the 7 to 8K range. So with Matt, more than 8 fairways, yeah, we'll talk about props later, Mark. So that's what I meant with like trying to keep the questions relevant. So I'm going to skip your question for now, but when we talk about props, I'd be more than willing to talk about that stuff. Do I like Pavon? So yeah, if we're going to talk about some cheaper plays, I think Pavon's a decent option, but the one thing I'll warn you about is that he's the highest owned option down there in the middle end of the sixes. So we'll talk more about him later when we get to the sixes, but yeah, I think he's an okay play if you're okay with taking ownership, right? If you've pivoted up there in the 7, 8, even 9K range, right, taken some sort of lower owned option, you could probably make a Pavon work. But if you're taking chalkier guys up top and he's rounding out that kind of lineup, right, he's the reason, you're fitting up like 2 chalky guys in the 9, 10K range. Right? If you're taking a 6K golfer, right, it's usually because you're jamming up a few guys up top, right? You better make sure that there's a pivot up there. So that's what I'll say about that. So let's talk about these 7, 8K guys. Then we'll get down to the bottom. And like I said, Mark, we'll talk about the prop stuff when we get to that section. I still like Will Zalatoris. I think Brian Harman is a player that you can take for leverage here. So 8K player, right around Will Zalatoris. He's about 4% lower owned than Zalatoris, but I've got Tony Finau at over 15%. I've got Benny Ann at nearly 15% ownership as well. And Brian Harman is arguably just as good as play as these other 2 guys, if not a better play, right? Brian Harman, recent form, number 12 in the field. That is a value, right, compared to number 20 in the pricing. And on top of that is a proven winner. And I know he's a shorter player, both in stature and his distance off the tee. But what you have to remember about Brian Harman is that he's also a winner at longer courses, right? He finished runner-up at a U.S. Open at a 7,900-yard golf course. He's had a win at this event. Now, it was at a different event, golf course. It was Eagle Trace, which is almost just as long as what we have here with Quail Hollow. But he's also shown up at a lot of other longer tracks where maybe you'd expect the Bombers to have an advantage. It's because of his long iron play, right? He's maybe not the longest off the tee, right? Hits the ball about 295 through the air, but with those 175 to 200-yard approaches, is one of the best players on the PGA Tour. So certainly, right, lacks in one category, but makes up for it in the others. And with that kind of stat profile, working out this week, he's maybe not an optimal play. Like, if he was long off the tee and was a stud with the long irons, he'd be super chalky this week, right? Everyone would be getting to, Brian Harman. But just because he's not a bomber is keeping that ownership below 8%. So I think if you're looking for a pivot, there are plenty of options up top. Right? I mentioned Hideki is one of our bonus plays. He certainly isn't going to give you leverage, but like you have the Hovlands up here that you can take at low ownership. Over here in this 8K range, I would say that I guess Harman would be your lowest owned pivot that I would really want to get to. But a Jordan Spieth, another guy who's going to be sub 10% that I'm playing out there. Now, Jordan's form, right, might be hard to get to, right? So maybe you don't play Jordan Spieth. But Harman, right, playing much better golf is probably a lot easier to get to for a lot of you guys out there. So I'm taking some disgusting plays this week, right, like a Jordan Spieth, to try and differentiate some lineups. But it doesn't mean I'm not mixing in like a chalky guy like JT. And I talked about him on Monday, right, as a player that was for sure going to be chalky. About 18.8% was about what I was expecting on a JT. So I'll still get over the field there. And in fact, Will Zalatoris down here at 11.8% is actually lower ownership than I was expecting. A lot of that is, I guess, because I forgot that he had that withdrawal at the back injury, right? He withdrew from the CJ Cup Byron Nelson. So I think that's why people are a little bit hesitant to get there. But, he's played his practice rounds. All signs seem to go, right, for Will Zalatoris. I don't think he's going to withdraw. If he does, right, that's a risk that you're going to have to take. But a byproduct is that we get a super cheap Willie Z, right? He's probably $1,000 too cheap here. Difficult golf course, right? That's where he pops off out there in the PGA Tour. And he's also a super leveraged play, right? Somebody you can get over the field on with 25%. So those are the kind of plays you can get different with, right? There's going to be chalky guys I'm playing. Wyndham Clark, Xander. Xander I'm playing, he's like 25% owned, right? So I'm certainly not getting different in that spot. But we have enough guys up here that we can mix in to get that leverage to where if I wanted to take a chalkier guy like Batia down here in the 7K range, I can afford to do so, right? So I mentioned Pavon, right, as having some ownership. If you have Sam Burns in there, who we'll talk about in a second, Brian Harman, Viktor Hovland, Jordan Spieth in that lineup, then for sure Pavon makes sense, right? He's playing better golf than a lot of the other guys around him, right? He's already won this year. I don't know if he's the best course fit. That would be my one critique of the play out there with Pavon, is that I don't think it's the best course fit for him, but he did win the Farmers Insurance Open, which is my number 2 comp course. So, we haven't really seen what type of player he is yet, right? He's only had, just a small sample here in 2024 when it comes to his shots gained. But in that small sample size, has a win at comp course. So I don't think it's the worst play at all. Let's see. So we'll talk about Sam Burns next. So I've got him at 6% ownership. And I know I mentioned him before, right, is not having that withdrawal risk, but also, right, having 2 wins at my top comp course in being another spot of leverage you can get to. So I do think the ownership has crept up a little bit, right, as that news came out, but I've still only got him at about 6%. A lot of that because of the recent form, which has been a little bit sketchy, right, as he's gone out there and had his kid. But now that that pressure has been released, right, he had his kid, obviously at home safe, delivered 2 weeks ago. Maybe that opens him up a little bit, right? He was losing across the board. It wasn't like he was playing horrible golf over those last 3-4 events, but wasn't doing anything special at the same time. So $7,700, high upside player, somebody that's won at comp courses, is a good way to get different up here. Now, in terms of chalky guys that you might have to worry about, I've got Corey Connors coming in with some ownership. I've got Tony Finau at 15% plus. Down here in the 7Ks, there's not a lot of chalk that stands out, right? So Akshay at 13.3% is actually one of the higher owned options that we have here. But a Steven Yeager, I've got it about 10% ownership, nothing outrageous there. And then when you get down to the 6s and 7s, ownership is extremely spread out. So it's not like we're going to have those sub 1% players like we have for a full main slate with 140 players, but you also don't have guys down here that are like 15% owned. In fact, let me bring up the other tab. Let me look at my ownership projections that aren't censored out and give you guys the highest ownership number down there. So Matthew Pavon is 7.4%. I've got Taylor Moore getting some steam. He's 8.2% owned. I also have Kurt Kitayama at 8.3% himself. All of those numbers are, it's not trivial, right? A lot of times those sort of players should be like 3-4% owned out there for a main slate, but it's also not any crazy ownership. It's not like 15-20%, rather obvious fades down there in the 6s. So I would say with the ownership, a good place to get different this week would be up top, right? Normally down low, we can just kind of mix and match guys and find those sub 5%ers. It's not that type of week, right? The guys down low that I think are solid plays this week are all carrying quite a bit of ownership, which is why the Sam Burns, the Brian Harbins, the Jordan Spieths, right? All these guys that are sub 10% are so important on a week like this, right? And especially like a Viktor Hovland up top. Right? If you take somebody that's different in the 9K range this week, you're going to get a ton of leverage to the other lineups up top. And that could be a way to go out there and make those chalkier options work. So I would say down low, I have some guys that are maybe higher owned than what I'm used to taking, but it's because I'm taking more of a contrarian stance towards the middle to top end of my lineup. So we'll build a few lineups together now. Let me bring up DraftKings. We'll go through a few builds to give you an idea of how that works out in practicality. So you talked about it. Now let me show you how it actually works out. Let me get a sip of my coffee. My throat is getting a little dry here. And if you have any last second questions about DFS, now is the time for it. Go ahead, fire those down in chat. I'll go through them after we build a lineup or two. And then afterwards, we're going to talk through the prop side. So if you haven't already smashed that like button, go ahead and do so. There are 74 of you legends down there in chat. Let's try and get close to 74 likes. So no excuses. Hit that like button. It's free down there in the bottom left. And all I ask from you, if you guys go out there and do that, and you can ask any questions you have for me. So let's talk through this. Let me get a sip of my coffee, like I said. And then we're going to build a few GPP lineups. So we're going to be thinking about some of the larger lottery type of contests and how you can build for this sort of week. Good old Starbucks coffee. Overpriced, but delicious. That's for damn sure. Let's go through this. So if we're building for the large field GPP, normally we would have some sort of weather edge that we could try and build in. But because of the tee time situation, it's not that type of week. So it's all about just using game theory to our advantage and crafting lineups that are going to be unique, right? We don't want to duplicate ourselves with other lineups out there. And we also want to make sure that we can go out there and get leverage to the field. So no duplicating, right? So that's going to come with some of that leverage, but also making sure that we can move up on those leaderboards. And I kind of already mentioned the game theory side for me this week, where I'm going to have pivots in the 8-9K range that get me different to the field. So I don't have to force in like a completely unowned guy down low, right? Like if I was starting lineups and they wanted to be super chalky up top, let's say that I wasn't comfortable with any of the pivots in the 8 and 9Ks. So let's say that kind of lineup, by the way, would look like this, right? It would start like a Wyndham Clark. Maybe it'd be a Hideki Matsuyama as your second man in. Down there in the 8K range, right? A Tony Finau is going to be a very popular option in a chalky lineup. If you're starting like this, you can make this work, right? Like these three chalky players are guys that I'm playing this week, right? I'll have lineups that start Clark, Hideki, Tony Finau, right? Like I don't think that this is a huge boo-boo. Like, I don't think that you have to avoid this kind of build, but what it does force you into is getting super different with at least 2, maybe even 3 of your last 4 spots, right? So this is where Sam Burns comes in handy, right? This is where that kind of leverage is going to be necessary. Down here in the middle end of the 7s, maybe you avoid an Akshay, right? Maybe you avoid a Steven Yeager who's getting some ownership, and you have to mix in a lower-end guy like a Shane Lowry, for example. So there are, I don't even know the right word for it. I guess there's consequences, I should say, for taking that chalk towards the top end of the board. And I think that some of the guys down here that are getting ownership. So, I mentioned Kurt Kitayama, right? He was getting some steam. Like, I like Taylor Moore, right? Taylor Moore's won at my top comp course, right? He played very well this year, right? At the Valspar Championship. Like, these kind of value plays that are garnering some ownership, the way that you get to one of those sort of players down low, as opposed, right, to Shane Lowry at lower ownership, is by taking a pivot up top. So you could still start with somebody like Wyndham Clark, but maybe rather than taking Hideki, this is where you take a slightly lower end Viktor Hovland, right? Rather than taking a pretty chalky Tony Finau, this is where taking a Brian Harman at that same same price tag at $8,000 could be a way to get a little bit different to the field. So this is how I'd be building lineups, right? I'd be forcing in some sort of differentiation. So whether you want to do that with a cumulative ownership number, you want to do that with a product ownership number like I do out there in my optimizer, just making sure that you're getting different enough out there with your builds and forcing in some of that leverage and forcing in that uniqueness so that you don't duplicate your lineup. So you can leave some salary on the table if you want to, right? If we just click some random guys in here, so let me just click Finau. If you want to leave some salary on the table, right, and take like a $7,400 player and leave 200, then that's totally fine for this kind of week as well. 1 second, guys. My throat is... I didn't want to blow out your eardrums there. My throat was killing me. But like I was saying, you can leave some salary on the table if you want to as well. And if you do so, that'll give you a little bit even more uniqueness, right? Give you a better chance of not duplicating with other lineups. Now, I think a lot of people confuse leverage with uniqueness, right? They go hand in hand, right? When you have more leverage, you're by default going to be more unique, but being more unique does not mean that you have more leverage, right? And what I mean by that is uniqueness is whether you're going to duplicate yourself or not. You leave salary on the table, you're giving yourself more uniqueness, But, right, depending on the ownership number that you're taking with that cheaper player, you might not necessarily have more leverage, right? Because leverage is about moving up the leaderboards, right? It's about the ownership numbers that you're locking in. So, for example, right, if we were to spend all of our salary at $7,600 and take a Christian Bezainhout, who is extremely low owned this week, we would have more leverage in this lineup. But if we go down here to $7,400, right, and take even 73, if we go down a whole $300, right, and then we're to take like a Denny McCarthy who's getting some ownership this week, he is higher owned than what we have with Bezainhout. So you'd be more unique here, right? You'd have more uniqueness because you're leaving that $300, but less leverage to the field. So determining what to do with your last man in, right, you have to look at the rest of your lineup. And then in this kind of lineup, right, where we have a kind of chalky fee now, right, like all these guys up here, these first 5 players, they're all getting some sort of ownership, right? They're all at least 8%. A lot of them 10, sometimes even 20, 25% owned, like what we have there with the Wyndham Clark. I care a lot more about leverage in this lineup than I do uniqueness, right? Like we can make the uniqueness work, right, by taking a leveraged player here. So I'd rather have Bezainhout than leaving that $300 on the table because we're getting a much more leveraged player, right? A 1-2% owned guy here like Seabez, even though we're spending all of our salary. And by default, right, because it's a 1-2% owned player, we are getting different to the field. So it's one of the most important things I could probably tell you about playing PGA DFS is that it's not who you're playing, it's how you play them, right? It's the type of combinations that you're getting to. And that illustration of the last man in is probably the best example of that. So hopefully I wasn't too confusing with that. I'm not always the best at explaining things in DFS. They work a lot better in the brain sometimes than they do when they're translated into words. So if you have any questions with that, just let me know. I understand it can be hard to follow sometimes, but I was just trying to give you guys a little bit of insight there. Let's see what we got. What's going on, Byron? How much is too much for Will Zalatoris? So I'm going 30%, which feels like too much, right? It feels like I'm going a little bit overboard there, but I would say nothing's too much. I think he's a high upside play at low ownership, but yeah, man, it's a risky one, that's for sure. But hopefully you're having a solid day, Byron. Hopefully you don't have that wind going on in the background that almost took us from you. Sorry, took you from us yesterday when you had all that wind going on. Any interest in Woodland? You know the form is horrendous, correct, but bombs it off the tee and solid course history. So I think he's a sneaky play. Now, I'm not getting there. So, he's too sneaky for me. They go out there and get exposure, but he's $6,100. So, I mean, if you need that salary, I mean, that's huge, right? That's $100 above the minimum right there. And you hit the nail on the head. He is a bomber. He hits his long irons well. So those are the two main things that I'm considering this week. So it's $6,100. Like I said, I understand the upside. I think he's a sneaky option, but the form just makes him a little too sneaky for me, right? Like it feels like, it's a real ugly play. These plays work out from time to time, but outside of the approach play, everything's been a negative. And even that off the tee play that he's kind of known for has actually been a detriment of his over the last 12 measured rounds. So if we zoom out a little bit, right, give him a little bit more of a break, right, larger sample size to work with, these numbers should improve, but not by much, right? Even if we zoom out, give him a full 24 rounds to work with, it's really sketchy. So, sorry, I'm on the wrong tab here. My bad, guys. It's towards the latter half of the live stream. Oh, I did it again. At least I caught myself this time. There we go. There's the right tab. You can see here he's losing in every category, but on approach, it's a tough one. But yeah, long term, you're right. The course fit, you're spot on with it. It's there. Smash the like button. Like Byron said, do it, guys, if you haven't already. Smaller field, what product ownership is reasonable? So if you're in a smaller field sort of contest, you should cater it towards how many entries you're entering. And the way that I do it, Emma and Hala, is I try to make sure that every lineup that I'm entering has less than one duplicate in theory. So the way that you do that, by the way, is you take your product ownership, you multiply it by the amount of entries in the field, right? So you have that essentially will give you how many duplicates in theory that you should have. Now, the actual numbers for duplicates are going to be higher than the theoretical number. I could talk about for 2 hours why that's the case, but we don't have the time for it right here. But that's what I would do. I would try to keep my theoretical duplicates under one. So if you're in a smaller field contest, maybe it's only like 100, 200 entries, that number is going to be a lot larger than what you have. So without knowing the exact number, just go out there, calculate that, right? 1 over the amount of entries. And that's the product ownership I try to stay under, right? It's that easy too, right? 1 over the amount of entries and it'll give you that number. Thunderstorm. Ernie under the table again. Oh, wow. You're talking about, you got another thunderstorm today, but you're going 100% Zalatoris. Oh my gosh, you're locking them. That's a bold take. I love it. But damn, you guys must have a really nasty weather spell coming through, right? Like you had yesterday, you had the storms. Today, you're having more. Florida, it's been beautiful down here in Florida, but hey, it'll change down here soon. We have hurricane season coming. We have rain every day essentially coming down here in Florida. So yeah, that weather's coming our way. You're using me as background noise for the Ernie, the Big Easy during the storm. He says thanks. Hey, let him know I got him out there, right? That white noise just drowning out some of that thunder. I sure will help him out there a little bit. So let's talk through one more lineup for the lineup construction segment, and then we'll hop over to the prop side. And I have a lot to talk about with props, and maybe a little bit of a hot take when it comes to the props too. Who is the best Canadian player in the field? Asking the important questions, right? Nationality bets. Well, if I had to pick a Canadian this week, it's Mackenzie Hughes. And it's not that I think he's the best Canadian in the field. That right is probably Corey Connors, right? He's the most accomplished Canadian in the field. But Mackenzie Hughes, believe it or not, this is his home course, which I did not know until today that this is Mackenzie Hughes' golf course. And, you know, he's a bomber now, right? He hits the ball a lot longer than normal. So we don't really have that concern with Mackenzie Hughes, which I think is huge for him, right? He's a really good putter. Now, the long irons, not the best, right? He's not an elite tier player with the long irons. But if that's the only issue we have with him and he's $6,600, it's his home freaking golf course, count me in on some Mackenzie Hughes. So yeah, he's probably not the best in the field, but I do like him the most this week. What's going on, Rev Cloud? If you're having a solid day, you thought hurricane season was over, it might be, honestly, dude. I don't keep up with it that much, but it's getting to the wet season during summer down here in Florida. So, you know, hurricane season is like 4 or 5 months down here. So I think it's coming around rather soon. In fact, I want to research this now that you said that. I don't think it is. Because we haven't had any tropical storms in a long time, which means that it's coming around. So I'm fairly certain that you're wrong. So let me double check on that. Yeah, it's from June 1st to November 30th. Yeah, it's in like 20 some days. So yeah, and I'll actually bring that up to show you so that I'm not just saying that. Oh, no, not the Twitch stream. Why was I bringing up a Twitch stream? Whoops. All right, there it is. Yeah, and this is Wikipedia, so I guess it's Wikipedia. We can't take it 100% seriously. But yeah, it's June 1st to November 30th. So, yep, nope, that's coming our way down here. Not great. Not looking forward to that, man. And yeah, I was like, it had been like 6 months since we had a tropical storm. So yeah, no, it's coming soon. Great info on the course breakdown. You'd like to know the penalty for hitting it in the rough. Well, normally Anointed, it's pretty bad hitting in the rough. Normally it's like 3-inch rough here, but this year it's only 2 inches wrong. So I wouldn't say that it's that bad. It's from the Pineapple Express. Okay. All right, let's talk about this a little bit. So let's go through one more lineup together, right? We talked through how you can make a chalkier lineup work, but if you're going to take more of the pivot options up top, like 9, 10K range, take some pivots, it opens up your lineup down low, right? So to show you how that'd work out, maybe we're starting this lineup with Xander, right? It doesn't really matter who you're taking up top, but what taking in a $11,500 player is going to do is it's going to force us into the 6K range, right? So we've got Xander Schauffele here, second man in. We're going to go ahead and throw in a Viktor Hovland, right? So that's going to be that leveraged play that we're taking up top. Down here in the 7Ks, I'm going to throw in a Sam Burns at $7,700. I'm also going to try and get a little bit different with my fourth man in and take a Harris English at $7,400. So we could probably take another 7K guy up here. So we can maybe even take a Will Zalatoris here. What we're going to do, right, is we have one pivot Hovland, one pivot with Sam Burns. I would even say the English and Zalatoris are relatively low owned. So what I wanted to do here is I wanted to take a chalkier guy as my last man in. I wanted to say, like, okay, right, because we took pivots up top, we could take like a Kurt Kitayama. So I guess we can't take Zalatoris, right, in that kind of lineup just because of salary. So let's go ahead and just throw in like a Taylor Pendrith, whoever the hell you want down here at $7,400. The important part is because we took a pivot like Hovland, Sam Burns, right, even a Harris English here, it doesn't really matter who we take down here in the 6s, right? We've already got that leverage in our lineup. We already have a few sub 10% owned players, so we don't have to worry about taking an 8% owned Kurt Kitayama. So the kind of lineups where I'd avoid Kurt, right, would be where I'm starting chalkier up here, right? Where it's, you know, taking a second man in like a, you know, Hideki, who's a little bit chalky, right? When you're taking Tony Finau down here in the AK range, right? It's harder to swing somebody like a Kitayama. Who else was chalky, right? Like a Taylor Moore, for example, where he's getting some ownership, Pavon $7,500, than it would be if you were taking a Hovland instead of a Hideki Matsuyama. So I think that there's a lot of value in taking a slightly lower owned guy up top because it gives you more flexibility down towards the bottom. So that's it from the lineup construction. I think going through 2 lineups, right, probably gives you a pretty good idea. We'll go over any last second DFS stuff. And then after that, talk about props, which, like I said, I got a lot to talk about there. I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, it looks like we're good at DFS questions. Let's go through some of this prop stuff then. So prop averages from last year, which I think are the most comparable to what we're going to get here this year, because the rough isn't as long, right? Historically, kind of like the person just asked about some of the over there with the rough, it's not as long this year, and it wasn't as long last year. It's only a 2-inch Bermuda grass rough. It's actually it's like 90% overseed, so a little bit more of the overseed than Bermuda. And if it was a true Bermuda grass, it would actually be more penal than what you have with the overseed. So it's short, it's not sticky like Bermuda grass. And last year, this course played easier than what we were used to seeing. So it only played 0.23 over par. There were 2 days where it was pretty windy too, played like 0.75 over par. Round 1, it's going to be windy, right? We mentioned that before. We have like 25-mile-an-hour wind gust for a lot of the day. I think that that's going to be the only thing that they have to combat because they have all that rain coming down. It's going to be a super soft golf course by the time they go out there. There's probably a good chance that it's lift clean in place. So though you have some wind out there, right? Wind can make Quail Hollow a pretty difficult golf course. It's not going to be firm and fast, right? So you've got one factor helping players, right? The soft golf course, you've got the wind kind of working against the players. So I have it playing slightly harder than last year, right? You can see at the bottom of that sheet, I had my projections for Thursday, but it's not drastically different, right? I have the scoring average between half a stroke over par and maybe a stroke over. So that would be 71.5 to 72 strokes. I have the birdie average between 3.25 and 3.5 out there per round. The bogey average between 3.75 and 4 per round. Green and regulation average and fairway averages hardly different than what we had before. So I think the reason that green averages stay pretty consistent is because you have more receptive greens, right? They're not as firm and fast. You're not going to have as many that roll off the green, but you also have windy conditions, right? Which makes it harder from the ball striking perspective, right? You have to flight the golf ball when you have that wind out there, right? You have to use it and ride the wind on a lot of your shots. So that adds difficulty, but with the soft conditions, right, that makes up for a lot of that as well. So you can see that the green average doesn't move much, and your fairway average actually have higher than what you had there in 2023. So with the receptive conditions, not as much rollout off the tee. Xander Schauffele was talking about it in his presser today, but there was hardly any rollout on the fairways, and that was before the storm came through. And now with the even softer conditions, you might have 0 rollout on the fairways, which would be huge for the fairway hit percentage. So I have it at 7.75 per round, but honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this was 8+ per round. So that should give you an idea of what I'm expecting. But, last year, right, I think a pretty good barometer for what we're going to get here in 2024. And I think after the wind dies down, so rounds 2 and 3 look a lot calmer than what we're supposed to have for Thursday, that you're going to see an under par scoring average. I think you're going to see this place torn up, especially out there for round 2. And if they still have ball in hand out there for Friday and the winds die down, I mean, these guys are going to nuke the golf course. So that should be pretty good perspective for what we're going to hop into here. And I think every single prop, but like 1 or 2 that I took on Underdog has already been bumped. So there was an absolute metric fuck ton of value out there earlier today. Even early yesterday, there was a ton of value out there, but I still think there's a few that are hanging around. So we'll go over a few of those after we talk through a prize pick slip, because the prize pick stuff I know is still at the same kind of number. So I took Wyndham Clark under strokes, and then I took Alex Noren over strokes. So Alex Noren is down here at 71 strokes. We've got Wyndham Clark at 70.5. Wyndham Clark on DraftKings and Fanduel is juiced -140 towards the under, and that's at the same number at 70.5. So we have a little bit of sportsbook juice in our favor there, which of course, right, if you're a plus EV better is exactly what you're looking for. But outside of that, right, I'm not a huge plus EV guy when it comes to golf. I am for football and I am for NBA. That plus EV is like my entire strategy. When it comes to a prop for those sports, golf, it can be helpful at the very least. So Wyndham Clark under strokes is more so about the scoring average, which I have between half a stroke to a stroke over par. if I think the scoring average is even going to be a whole stroke over par or 72 strokes, well, I have Wyndham Clark at about 2 shots gained per round around this golf course. So if he's going to gain on average about 2 strokes per round, that puts him at a 70 stroke projection, which is why I'm taking him for an under at 70.5 strokes. And that would be a worst case scenario, right? With an entire over, a scoring average of an entire stroke over par. And I think it might only be a half a stroke over with those wet conditions, the lift clean in place. So that's an under that I like, right? The sports books tend to agree with that one. And then the over on Alex Noren as on a player that I don't really think fits this golf course, where he's coming in with really good form. That's the main argument for taking an under on Noren. But I like the over because he's not a long player off the tee. And when you play a Quail Hollow, right, distance is the name of the game to begin with, but especially when you have no rollout in the fairways, right? I mean, this golf course is going to play extremely long out there. And while a Wyndham Clark can get away with that because he hits the ball further than everyone else, right? I mean, he's the highest ball speed player on tour, not named Rory, right? Alex Noren is at the other end of that, right? He only carries the ball about 290 yards off the tee, and he requires rollout to have any sort of chance. So at 71 strokes, he's somebody that I project for actually slightly worse than the field average, which is kind of wild because he's had really good form coming in. But at this kind of golf course where his last 2 starts have been cuts, at this event where he's missed the cut his last 2 starts, right? I think that there's a lot of evidence that he doesn't play well here. So I've got him at about a 72, maybe even a 72.5 stroke projection. And you can see where there's some value here, right? Because you can take some elite tier players in hard conditions and they'll still shoot like 1-2 under par. And right at 70.5, that's all we're asking Clark to do, right? He shoots 1 under, goes out there and covers, right? That's reasonable for an elite tier player. These guys like Noren, right? These guys like even like a Henley, like a lot of the guys down here at like 71.5 strokes, I'd be considering for some overs. So I think you can make some decent slips over here on Prize Picks where you're getting the full payout multiplier if you're picking your spots wisely. So that's the first slip that we'll go with over here on Prize Picks. Of course, I'm limited to $5 slips there, so there's only so much I can do. So a lot of my exposure, and I already have like $850 worth of slips in over here in Prize Picks, is just mixing and matching this field. So let's see if there's any questions. Thoughts on Seamus Powers? He's coming in 120th or contending in a top 20. You're right. Yeah, you're spot on with that, Chandler, right? He's got a really wide range of outcomes, right? He's probably either missing the cut, right? Probably finishing in 69th, right? Last place this week. Or I wouldn't be that surprised if he top 10, right? Top 15, right? When he has his best stuff, he normally goes out there and shoots pretty low scores, right? Like he's been first round leader, at least in contention for that, a handful of times this year, right? 3-4 times already. And we're only in May over here this year. So yeah, I understand that one. Thoughts on JT Poston? So he's in the same bucket for me as a few other shorter hitters that I'm taking. So like, I wouldn't call Tom Kim a shorter hitter by any means, right? I wouldn't call Mackenzie Hughes a shorter hitter. Let me share my screen, bring up my DFS projections again. Like I'm playing both of those guys in my player pool, but somebody like a JT Poston, right? Somebody that's like an average player off the tee. The only reason you'd get to them is if they're lower owned, right? And you have that with JT Poston, right? You have that with Tom Kim at only 7.5%, right? A Mackenzie Hughes at 3.5% ownership. So in my opinion, there's a time and place for that kind of player. So I wouldn't use him as a core play, right? I wouldn't be taking him as an outright or for a one and done option. But in large field GBPs, it feels like there's one guy like that a year, right, at this event that goes off that doesn't have the power. Now, and I'll just show you this, Primo. I think the best way to show that would just be on Data Golf. So let me bring up Data Golf real quick and show you what I'm talking about. But there's not that many. Actually, we can do it on Bet the Number. Let's do it on Bet the Number because they're, of course, a partner with the channel. So we'll stick with the partner website for this. But like last year, right, there weren't that many short players that played well. But Michael Kim did finish in 7th, right? And a 7th place out of JT Poston would be optimal, right? Would be okay with that for a large field GBP. Go to the year before that, Abraham Answer, and this is back in 2021, right? Because 2022 was at a different golf course. The Abraham Answer, right? Obviously, if you're new to Golf DFS, you might not know who he is. But before, he went to live, he's a very short player off the tee that's really good with the irons, right? He finished in 2nd that year, right? And you also had Patrick Reed finish T6 that year. Then the start before that, right? You had Justin Rose finish in 3rd. You had Duffner, who's not that long off the tee, right? Finish in T4 back there in 2019. A lot of the other guys, in fact, like every other guy on this list, right, is a bomber, right? That's finishing in the top 10. But there are that 15, maybe 20% of players every single year that still get the job done, right? Even if they're not the longest player off the tee. So Yeah, I don't think that's the worst idea whatsoever. So, yeah, to answer your question, I think he's a decent play. Hey, Luke, have I tried Parlay Play? They just added golf. I have not, and I have to check that out. It's a lot of those smaller sites are starting to add golf now. Like I know who was the last site that I saw add it? Sleeper hasn't added. I think Vivid Picks right also has golf at this point. I have to check it out. I haven't yet, but thank you for the heads up. I'm always looking for a site to get more golf action down, especially where I don't have limits. Which honestly, at this stage is the name of the game for me. Right? It's just being able to get more action down. So I appreciate the heads up. That can be huge. Mark says, you covered a lot, but do I mind going back to your prop stuff? Yes, absolutely. Thank you for reminding me. Now it's a great time to go over that. So this one, right? You're saying this one. Okay. So is that Kuchar? Let's see which players you're talking about. So it's who's Matt? Oh, Matt Fitzpatrick you're talking about at 8 fairways hit. So that feels like a good projection to me. If I think the average is going to be like 7.75, it's going to be about 8 fairways per round. Matt Fitzpatrick's about an average accuracy player. I'd probably put him at about 8 fairways. So, if you're going to lean over, I don't think that's the worst play, right? I think you get away with that for sure. But I don't think it's like an obvious piece of value, right? Like I think an 8 projection is pretty fair for somebody like him, but I'm not sure if I'd call it crazy value. The Alex Noren strokes, though, yeah, I like that one. So, yeah, if you're looking for a pairing, man, I think that's a decent option. But like you're just asking Matt Fitzpatrick essentially to have an above average accuracy day, right? If he goes out there, he has his average round, he's probably hitting 8 fairways, right? Which is a push. Honestly, not the worst thing in history. If he goes out there and he hits more fairways than you're expecting, you like those soft conditions, right? You like the fact that there's not going to be much rollout. Totally understand that. So, yeah, I'm not getting there myself on Matty Fitz, but I think that's a good call, man. Especially, I think overs on fairways in general are a pretty good spot to take. I was trying to find some guys at 7.5 that made sense. I was kind of eyeing Tom Hoagie because he's not the worst accuracy driver. I was also kind of looking at Max Homa for a potential over at 7.5. But yeah, Matty Fitz at 8 isn't a bad call either. So yeah, I like that, man. Let's see. Was there anyone else you had that about? So yeah, it was just Matt Fitzpatrick. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good one. Thank you for your thoughts. Of course, Primo, I got you. Rory, phone shitter lineup definitely hitting this week. Hey, probably, right? Probably some one of those randoms that goes out there and ships it. But hey, I'm going to follow the process and continue to go about it, right? I'm not gonna play that slapdick Rory this week. What do I think? Do I think most people will start Clark and Homa and then somehow ending them with both in your lineups? No, I don't think so. I think a lot more people are going to start with Rory than somebody like Wyndham Clark. And I also think that Xander is going to be the same ownership, if not higher, than what you have with Wyndham. And then Max Homa, let me look at my ownership. I don't think I have Max Homa as the highest owned player in that range. Pretty sure he's like number 2, but let me double check. Yeah, I've got Homa at 18.1%. I've got Sahith at slightly higher ownership. I think the lineup that more people are going to land on is Rory, right? So you're going to have to spend up a little bit, right? So it's $11,800. And then rather than taking Homa, because they're spending that salary, they're probably going to take a Sahith, a Hideki, or a Cam Young as their second man in, right? So they're probably going to have to go a little bit cheaper because they're spending up there at $11,800. So I think that some people are going to take Clark Homa, right? If you're going to spend down for Clark, it'll give you a little bit more salary to fit in a Max Homa. But I don't think it's the most chalky combination, if that makes sense. Like I think that there are other combinations, right? Specifically, right, that Rory, maybe Cam Young combination, that'll be slightly higher owned than that. All right, let's go through this underdog stuff. So what I have to do here, I mean, I already have, I don't have action. The issue is finding stuff that hasn't moved because literally every single prop that I took moved. And I think it was except for 2 of them. So I guess I got to find those 2 exact props. So yeah, all of those have gotten bumped so far. Even Morikawa got bumped. Didn't take a Ricky Fowler prop. So I guess we could circle back to him to add a prop slip. Let's see. They moved my Cam Young prop. They moved my Will Zalatoris prop. I didn't take a Sahith Theegala prop, so none of that moved. Sam Burns got moved. Hideki didn't get moved, right? Let me double check the number I got. I thought it was 71.5. Maybe it was 71. Oh, okay. So Hideki hasn't moved. 71 strokes is a prop that I took. So, okay. You can use that one. Then we got to find one more. It's an absolute meme that they went out there and moved every prop. By the way, like they're so scared of me that it's actually a little bit sad how scared they are of my exposure. If I take things and I put them on my Patreon page, they just immediately move them because they're scared. Let's see. So Tony Finau, yeah, that got bumped. The Max Homa one got bumped. Got bumped twice actually out there with Max Homa. Didn't take a Tom Kim prop. Actually, I did, but that got bumped, of course. Rory got bumped. Hovland got bumped. Didn't take a Tommy Fleetwood prop, so of course that one didn't move. And then, Chris Kirk bumped. So every single prop that I took, except for Hideki Matsuyama, got bumped. So we're going to have to find a pairing for it here. So I'll find you guys a prop to take. He's at 70.5 on Prize Picks, so there is a 0.5 discrepancy, which is why I'm a little bit surprised that they haven't moved that down to 70.5. So, hey, we still have that to work with, and we could find one more prop to mix in. So if I was going to take anything as of right now, I kind of like this under on Finau. I got him at 71.5, right? So that's why I initially wasn't going to point it out, right? It already moved to 0.5, but he is 0.5 lower on Prize Picks, right? Actually, he's not. So he got bumped up to 71 strokes. Yeah, I probably don't force it in then, right? I was going to say because he's at 70.5, right? Maybe you do take him right out there in that slip, but because of that line movement, I probably stay away. So let's find something else. Wrong prop. I didn't hate that when I was first going through. And there was one other birdie prop I was looking at. Yeah, I don't hate that either. And there was one more. And it was a 1.1x I'm looking for here. At 3.5, I believe, was the projection. See, it definitely wasn't Ricky Fowler, that's for sure. Yeah, it was I think it was Colin Morikawa. So what I would do here is I would take these two if I was entering a slip over here in Underdog. Now, you saw those other 1.1x's that I thought weren't the worst bet in human history. The reason why I would take Colin Morikawa is he's a top 30 birdie maker on tour, right? He's a good long iron player, right? With super soft conditions, you have to imagine he's going to hit a few darts out there. And honestly, for anyone to be at 3.5 birdies and a 1.1x towards the over is a mistake, because if you go over here on, birdies are better on Prize Picks, right? He's at 3.5, but he has no multiplier, right? For example, if we took two overs on birdies together, right, we'd only get a 2.75x payout. But over here in Underdog, even though we're taking two props that are in the same direction, right, because of that 1.1x multiplier, this is paying over 3x, right, for that 2x combination. So we're still getting some correlation by taking these two players. And, the Hideki one, there's a value, right? It's a 0.5 discrepancy compared to Prize Picks. This Underdog prop is probably pretty fair, right, at 3.5 birdies, but we're getting a payout boost, right? And that's why it's worth mixing into a few lineups. So that's what we're going to go with for the combination on Underdog. Unfortunately, right, a lot of these are going to get bumped that I post on my Patreon. So if you want access to those as they drop so that you can get just to show you guys, it's ridiculous how many slips I have in for round one. If you guys want to get all these, make sure to check out the Patreon page, right? That's where I'm posting those. Like, to give you an example, right? Like, I'll just show them to you, right? They moved, right? So I guess there's no point at me not showing you what I took, right? Got these guys at 3 birdies. They're all at 3.5 now, right? Like, I got Spieth at 3 birdies is at 3.5, right? Hideki didn't move. Look at that. The one prop that didn't move, but like Zalatoris was at 3, right? I got Cantlay before he got a multiplier, right? Like, this is the type of value you get if you're over there on the Patreon page. So there's a reason why these lines move, right? Like 3.5 birdies on Hovland. Like, let me show you this on Fanduel. So Fanduel posts birdie props. You guys probably know that by now. We've been showing them quite a bit on live stream, but the value that we got on some of these guys at 3.5 is just unheard of when it comes to like if you're a plus EV better, at least it's unheard of value. So let me show you that. So we go over here, we find guys like a Rory, right? He's at 4.5 birdies. I got him at 3.5, which you might be like, Rory at 3.5 birdies. He was never up at that. Yeah, he was. He was at 3.5. He had no multiplier this week, believe it or not. But if you look at this, right, he's at 4.5 over there. But if we find some of these guys at 3.5, like Viktor Hovland is minus 150 over, right? Wyndham Clark, right, is minus 190 towards the over, right? Xander Schauffele is minus 190 towards the over. And they have those up at 3.5 early in the week. So obviously rounds 2 through 4, we'll be doing some live slips on live stream where we can try and find the same sort of value. But if you want it for the main slate, you want all my slips for rounds 2 through 4, just like the showdown stuff, just like the spreadsheets that you see throughout my content, make sure to check out the Patreon. So let me see if there's any last second questions. We'll go through them. I want to bring up Hard Rock, go through my outright betting card. I also have some outrights for the Myrtle Beach Classic. So we can talk those. We can talk my betting card for the main event, right? the Wells Fargo Championship, and then we're going to hop on out of here. So, all right, there's Hard Rock Bets. Let me share my screen and see if there's any questions. All right, where are we at? Of course, thoughts on Benny Yan. Not my favorite play, Sam. So he's a little bit too high owned for me, right? He's getting some exposure. He's a little bit overpriced, in my opinion. So yeah, not my favorite play. I think you're a week late, right? He played really well last week, and I think that was the spot to get him at. So let's talk through my betting cards. So I have Wyndham Clark at 16 to 1. He unfortunately has moved a little bit. I have Max Homa at 22.5 to 1 as an outright bet. JT at 30 to 1. Who else? Viktor Hovland at 25 to 1. So I got a bad number there, right? That went to 30 to 1 by the time that we got there. But the numbers that haven't moved, we have Will Zalatoris at 40 to 1, and then Akshay Bhatia at 50 to 1. So if looking to add anything now, right, these longer shots that haven't moved, I think are a really good spot. Or even Hovland, right? Because he's a better number than what I got on Monday. So those are the bets I'd stick to, right? Guys like JT that got steamed, right? Max Homa, a Wyndham Clark. If you're going to bet them, right, wait for a better live number, right? Maybe they start a little bit slow, even par, maybe 1 over the first 3 or 4 holes. That's a pretty decent spot to hop on that kind of player. So it's a no-cut event. It's a pretty good week to do some live outrights because these guys aren't going to miss the cut, right? Even if they start like 1-2 over par early, it might be a decent spot to add them for a live outright. So that's it for that event. Over here in the Myrtle Beach Classic, the odds on Hard Rock Bet are an absolute scam. So all I did is I took 6 outrights at $25 a piece that were all 60 to 1 or further. So they're all just massive long shots. It was an Alejandro Tosti. It was, okay, hopefully I find them all as we go through here. Parker Cootie was another one. I bet Aaron Baddeley out there for an outright 75 to 1 on both Cootie and an Aaron Baddeley. I bet Sam Ryder. I bet Joel Damon all at 75 to 1. And then I also bet Carson Young. I believe that's all 6. Maybe that was only 5. But yeah, I also bet Carson Young down here at 100 to 1. So I put $25 on him a piece, right, to win like $1,800, $1,900, sometimes even a little bit more than that if like a Carson Young wins. And the idea is this is a brand new golf course. We have no idea what to expect. And some of the guys up top have better form, like Ben Griffin, Berger, like EVR. Like if I had a decent number on any of these players, I'd probably consider betting them this week. But there's no way I'm betting these kind of players at 25 to 1. Like it's just not going to happen, right? So it's an alternate field event. I think you should take shots further down the board. And based on what we've heard from some of the on-course reports, it's a more of a positional course off the tee. It's not a short course. It's like 7,400 yards, but you have to hit the fairways. That's what a lot of the on-course people have said. So if you've got to hit the fairways and you have to putt, are the 2 things that we've really heard from people on the course. So if I'm taking players out there for outrights, right, I was looking for players with birdie or better upside that hit fairways and that can fill it up with the flat stick. Now, some of the players can only do one thing, right? Some of them are good putters. Some of them are really accurate off the tee, but they had to check one of those 2 boxes for me. And then they had to just be a high upside player in general that I think is capable of winning a tour event, right? Because like down here in the 75 to 1 range, there are guys down here that I just could not see winning a tour event. Like I hate to pick on anyone in particular and I'm not going to pick anyone in particular actually, because if I do so, that player is going to go out there and end up winning. But there are guys down here in this range that like just have got no shot. So I'm not going to take a shot at any one player because again, I don't want to be disrespectful, but a good portion of the guys down here, 75 to 100 to 1, are just not the types to win on the PGA Tour. So I'd say go for the higher upside players, maybe guys that have won before, right? Like a Joel Damon, right? Guys like a Sam Ryder that have gone into contention at, alternate field events. Aaron Baddeley's won on tour before. Like, I don't think that's the worst spot. Now, I am betting Parker Cootie, who of course hasn't won on the PGA Tour, but has won on the Korn Ferry Tour, right? Is a winner on that sort of circuit. So, I'm looking for players that can spike you in, that can go out there, have that ceiling performance. And Toasty, again, is the lowest outright number that I took, right? And he's a whole 60 to 1 to win that golf tournament. So I went pretty light on my exposure, right? $25 units are, a quarter unit at most out there for when I'm betting on a golf outright. So I didn't go crazy on it, to say the least. Let's see, any questions? If not, we're hopping on out of here. All right, so how much Willie Z am I going to play? I'm playing like 30%. So, yeah, it's going to go badly this week. What about Glover? I think he's a better course fit. I like Glover more, right? He's cheaper and he's lower owned than Benny Yan. So, and I honestly think they're the same sort of guy, right? Benny Yan, Glover, ball striking guys that are kind of sketchy with the putter. Give me the Lucas Glover for sure. What's going on? Back for your weekly one and done advice. You're sitting at 15th out of 1K, so that's really good. So you're leaning Wyndham? Yeah, I'd go Wyndham, man. I'd save Rory for a major, maybe another signature event where you can take him. And I don't think Xander's a bad lean either. I really like Xander this week, man. I don't have an outright on Xander, but if there's one guy I'm scared just stealing this thing and ruining my outrights, it's Xander Schauffele, right? Normally that's Scotty Scheffler that we're worried about, right? Going out there just boat racing the field. But yeah, it's Xander. So I'd either go Clark or Xander. I'd go one of those two. I'd keep it pretty chalky since you're in 15th place, right? Like you don't want to get too different out there leading from ahead. And I think both of those plays are my top options because, I know you're joining us late, so I'll bring up the DFS stuff real quick. Oh, wrong sheet there. Whoops. I didn't mean to bring up the one that had all the projections on it. Whoops. Here's the one I meant to bring up. If you take a look at my modeling for Xander and Wyndham Clark, they're like number 2 in the 3 in field at everything, right? They're top 3 in the field in like every single category. That's what I'm looking for if I'm leading in one and done. So yeah, I go with one of those two, and you're kicking ass so far. So let's keep it going this year, huh? Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got for this live stream this week. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared for all this week's action. If you haven't already smashed that like button, go ahead and do so before you hop on out of here and subscribe so you don't miss any of our content throughout the weekend. Rounds 2 through 4 will be going live, going over all your DFS and prop concerns there. So make sure you stay tuned for all of that. We'll be going live sometime after the round ends. So likely about an hour after the round ends is when we're going to be going live. So tune in there for all of your showdown action throughout the weekend. And of course, for all of those prop slips that we're adding. Round 1 could be a little bit tough, like I said, especially for props and tailing because most of it has moved right by the time we get here to Wednesday. But rounds, for Friday through Sunday, a lot of it is what we're going over live on stream, right? A lot of times my first look at the board is actually on the live stream. So you guys get a really good chance to tail some of that. So I'm looking forward to it. Best of luck out there with all your exposure you're getting to. I've got some laps to make. I've got some dinner to get in my belly and to get ready for this week's action. So appreciate you guys, like I said before, and I'll see you guys for the live streams throughout the weekend.